All right, so you probably noticed that there's some differences then between a BIOS, a UEFI, and CMOS. We're going to summarize that, sum it up, and this is found on the fact sheet in BIOS settings. They actually show you BIOS settings. I'm going to have a link to a video. There's tons of videos out there over BIOS settings or UEFI settings. You can look those up. But it's super important. Of course, in class, you will actually deal with UEFI settings. And hopefully, if you're taking this all online, you'll do the UEFI little lab, hands-on lab, because you can look in your own UEFI, and as long as you don't save what you do, you're going to be okay. You can poke around in there without a problem. And it's really, again, it's really important for those issues that you finally narrow down to. This is hardware. And all the hardware information is coming from the BIOS, the UEFI, and it's being reported to Windows. So basically through that power on self-test and checking out what it does, Microsoft, Windows, or Mac OS, or any of them are going to have some more questions. And they're going to say, I need to populate my operating system with what we have. This is what I had the last time we boot. Does that check with this time that we boot? And so if you go into Device Manager on Windows, right, there's a ton of stuff in there. Where is that coming from? That's coming from the basic input-output system. It's coming from the UEFI. And so understanding that that's digging down through some layers in order to get that data is important. In other words, if Microsoft doesn't see it up top, then the BIOS isn't reporting it correctly. Something is wrong on that front. Anyway, let's take a look. Computer settings and BIOS, UEFI, they actually have a lab you get to look at here. And again, I'll have that link so you can look at that too. But very hard to be able to actually do a video of this and what's happening because I got to run Zoom or some recording software, and I'm not going to be doing that if I'm in a BIOS. Right, so what do you have in there once you start up? CPU clock and what you see are all the details about the hardware. One thing that I want to point out is that what you see in there is often the hardware names that it's given. For instance, you went out and bought a SanDisk M2 and put it in. But SanDisk doesn't just say SanDisk M2. In other words, it's got a model number. Things are displayed differently in the BIOS. And in order to become comfortable with it, again, when you're looking at an interface and you're like, I don't get what this interface is telling me, it's probably because you don't understand the background knowledge. That when you're looking at it, you have to understand the BIOS will control the storage. It will show you how much RAM. It will show you the CPU, the exact model of the CPU and how fast that CPU is. It'll show you how many cores are there. It'll show you all those details. And so really you need to understand the components that I have learned about are all being displayed in there. And it's not being made simple. It's not being made, I've got 2 sticks of RAM that are this fast. It's saying I got 16 gigs and this is the model number of that. So some very specific detailed information. Now, because of hacking, and it's about time that we updated the BIOS. BIOS, again, dates back to Gary Kildall and what he did in the 70s, right? So Unified Extensible Firmware Interface is a graphical boot tool that's utilized in many computer systems. It doesn't replace the BIOS, the basic input-output system, but it does the work of configuring the BIOS for the end user. Includes a lot of stuff in it, and the UEFI is basically a process that allows the boot to be secure, where our 1970s technology really wasn't concerned with that. That's a good way to look at it. And then there's your metal oxide semiconductor, complementary metal oxide semiconductor for CMOS. And that's where it's storing these settings that change all the time. And then they go through, hey, if you need to clear the CMOS, this is what you would need to do. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go through this list here. I'm going to tell you that basically what happens is, people can hack and get around things pretty easily if they can get their hands on the computer. And so let's take, for instance, a school. A school will go in and set passwords on the Cmos settings, or it'll set a BIOS password or a UEFI password, right? That's where we start to use these terms interchangeably because they're all so closely related to the boot process. In any case, so they go in and set a password, and then later on they forget about the password and they don't know. And now they got to go into the Cmos and change some settings, and they can't because there's password on there. So how do I go ahead and reset it? Well, the first method actually is there's no password on it, and you just go into the Cmos and it'll have right there on one of the screens, right? I can't tell you which screen because all those UEFIs are different, but on one of the screens, it'll be like, I need to reset these to the factory default. You select it and it resets everything to the factory default. You would do that process because something's not working right. That's basically what it comes down to. Something's not working right. The computers, to get into more information that you need to know at this level, the computer's just crashing. It's not throwing up a screen that says I'm going to crash or I have a problem. It's just crashing, which means we got a serious hardware issue. So you would go in, and one of the things you could do is say, just restore this to the factory defaults and let me test that and see if something's been corrupted in the Cmos or I changed something that I shouldn't have changed. But the example I'm giving you is, oh, they got a password on it. How do you clear it? Well, sometimes just taking the battery out of the board, there's that little round battery, that's for the Cmos. That's for the Cmos to retain what date it is and what kind of hard drives am I attached to and that kind of stuff. And so you can often take that out. Sometimes that doesn't work. On more secure systems, that's something that could easily be done in a school by a kid. Take the battery out. Now I can get into the Cmos and change what I want. And so some of them actually have a jumper that you have to set, 2 pins, and this thing goes over the pins basically and connects the pins. And the jumper will be sitting off to the side like this on one of the pins. Let me reverse that so you can see it. So there's the pin, and it's just sitting on one of the sides. And then you take that jumper, and now it's jumping these two. That's why they call them jumpers. And this clears the Cmos out. And then once it restarts and it cleared everything or cleared the password, then you take that jumper off and put it back. Otherwise, it'll continually clear the Cmos every time it starts. And so often there's a jumper in there that you have to use. And that's kind of what they're describing. Any and all of this these days is on the web. So you can go to YouTube and say, how can I reset blah, blah, blah board if you can get the model number off of it? And normally there's going to be something like, oh yeah, you got to grab this jumper, put this on, and then boom, it'll reset it. Just a little information about the differences in Cmos, UEFI, and BIOS settings. Again, I'll have a video there for you. You get to do a demo. Cmos or BIOS settings or UEFI settings are all different on different makes. Asus, which is the video I have, has a certain way of looking at things. MSI has a certain, HP has it, right? They're all different. And so you really have to understand, what is it showing me? That's the important part. And to reiterate, it is showing you all the hardware on the computer. And some of that information is changeable and updatable, and some of it is not. You want to see what kind of hard drive you really have, you go into the UEFI settings, you look at the hard drive, and it tells you what you have. And that's the same for just about anything. I can't remember what exactly my CPU is. Go into the UEFI CMOS, and there it is. It's all there. Hardware information is coming from the BIOS that you see in Windows.